point, Jack Lang may have kept pursuing to abolish the Legislative Council, but he had other fish to fry at this point. His eyes had been diverted to another enemy of his, which then, of course, became the Commonwealth government. Now, the government of the Commonwealth basically wanted to recoup money, but that happened a little bit later because at the turn of the year, a momentous occasion actually was achieved in Sydney. So the Harbour Bridge itself had actually been completed. It is, woo! Exactly, there it is. Yeah. You can see it on the back wall.
Lights and all.
Lights and all. So the celebration was going to be, or the opening ceremony was going to happen on the 19th of March, 1932. And it was actually a bit of a consensus that everyone thought that an invitation from New South Wales would be sent to the UK to have the elderly King George V make the journey all the way to the Southern Hemisphere and open this glorious monument to the modern industry of Australia with us. Interestingly, however, Jack Lang, ever in the limelight? No, he basically decided, he announced actually that he, not the King, will open the Sydney Harbour Bridge on that momentous occasion. Now, once the news broke that the Premier, not the King, was going to open it, that actually made its way all the way to the UK. And guess who was not happy? Good old Georgie himself. So King George basically demanded the governor, Sir Philip Game, to dispute that and say, no, you need to open it. So Sir Philip Game needs to open it because he represents the King, and the King should be the one who officially opens it. And ironically, Sir Philip Game actually turned around and said, no, yes, he has the ability to open the bridge. Like, he's perfectly fine to do it. I don't need to do it. And so, yeah, that was, he basically reassured the King that said Jack Lang was perfectly fine to open the Sydney Harbour Bridge. However, this new guard who didn't want to have their ideological enemy being the one opening the bridge, they wanted the governor, of course, they decided to come up with a plan. Now, you might be thinking of a certain plan, but this is a totally different one that was not so well known until about 2 weeks before the opening actually commenced. So they came up with a plan to kidnap the Premier of New South Wales. So it was very, very interesting. They worked out that the Premier, whenever he worked in Sydney, either at Parliament House or at the Premier's office, he would then drive home to Auburn. So he lived in Auburn. He represented Auburn as a member, and he would drive down Parramatta Road with the official car and stuff. So the New Guard's plan was to simply, checkpoint the Parramatta Road and kidnap him, hijack his car and drive him off.
Which still happens on Parramatta Road.
Yeah, but still, when you get to Auburn. I shouldn't say that. But once they did that, the call to arms for the 10,000 members would go out. And interestingly, they would then be ordered to invade or take over the local barracks around the area, so Holsworthy and Richmond and stuff like that, acquire equipment, and then storm Macquarie Street with Parliament House and the ministers. They would then take over Parliament House, arrest the ministers, and then transport all of them as political prisoners to a certain disused jail in Berrima.
Yeah, nice little connection there.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
So that disused jail in Berrima, they were going to actually use as their holding political prisoner cells for the Premier and all these ministers of the Labor Party at that time. And they would essentially control New South Wales.
From Berrima Jail.
From Berrima Jail.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Not cool, by the way.
Interesting.
Interesting, that's the word I was saying.
Yeah, right.
And this was all an effort so we open the bridge.
Yeah, right.
As you could imagine, because we're still in a democratic society here in New South Wales, they did not succeed. 2 of their members got arrested. The police found out about the whole coup d'etat, and so decided to then announce it. The best way to put a fuse on it was to give it enough attention that they weren't going to be ballsy enough to do it. So they put it in the newspapers saying they were foiled, and so the New Guard and their rhetoric against Jack Lang stepped down. It was at this point that a lot of the bookkeepers in Sydney, typical Australians, we always like to bet on something, they actually bet that it was 6-1 that the New Guard would not disrupt the opening of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Now, upon that actual, yeah, I know, right? So upon that sort of betting around the circles, a certain Captain Francis de Groot had a bit of disgruntlement with that, so decided to come up with his own plan, which we'll get to a little bit later. Very infamous, of course. But interestingly, the same day as the announcement of this foiled coup d'etat from the New Guard, the Commonwealth government also started to try and enact getting their money that they're owed. So they called it the Enforcement Act. They passed it through their parliament to make it a law that New South Wales had to pay the Commonwealth by any means necessary. The main reason would be, or the main way to get this money would be basically siphoning it from the banks. If any of the banks held New South Wales funds, they would simply divert them to the Commonwealth. Now, interestingly, Jack Lang wasn't going to take that lying down. He was going to fight them tooth and nail. So he very simply said, I think that's not allowed. Don't think that's illegal.
Very politely say.
Yeah. So very simply, he then referred it to the High Court, whether or not it was legal for the Commonwealth to then take money from the New South Wales state. His argument of how it's illegal, however, is a bit interesting. He cited that in 1833, the British Empire abolished slavery. And thus, the Commonwealth government removing funds from the state is essentially making the state unable to pay its servants or the public servants, making it a state of slavery. Yeah, you can follow along with that. Naturally, the High Court said no, that's not the case. But it took about a month, so it was a delaying tactic to try and really argue the point, and gave Jack Lang and his government a month to fight it out in the courts before they started losing money. But in that time, the 19th of March rolled around. It was, of course, a beautiful, bright, sunny Saturday. A sea of people was ready to cross the bridge for the very first time. Big difference to the trickle of cars that usually make its journey across the harbour nowadays. Close to 1 million people came to cross the bridge for the very first time. Great parades with floats were erected, bands played, grandstands were set up on either side of the Bradfield Highway for spectators, and there was a flotilla of vessels in the harbour. The white ribbon was stretched across the road deck, ready to receive the golden scissors specifically made for the very special event. Everyone waited as the official motorcade made their way onto the highway, flanked by mounted lancers. Hiding amongst the guard was Captain Francis de Groot, dressed in his hussar uniform, riding a borrowed horse named Mick. Strapped to his belt, his ceremonial sword. As the speeches from the Governor-General, Sir Isaac Isaacs, from the Governor of New South Wales, and from the Premier all wrapped up, everyone felt the excitement build as they craned their necks to get a better view of Lang striding towards the ribbon. Before he could reach it, Captain de Groot broke ranks, rode up towards the ribbon, sword in hand. He actually expected to break the ribbon with the chest of the horse. However, Mick was a bit skittish and turned to the left. So de Groot decided then to try and slash the ribbon. So he slashed downwards, missing. He slashed upwards, which barely affected the material. So in exacerbation, he just basically grabbed the ribbon and then sawed it with his sword. Now, once it was actually finally broken after this whole little kerfuffle, Captain de Groot rose his sword with finesse and shouted to the very startled crowd at this point, "For the decent and loyal people of New South Wales, I declare this bridge open." As he was very quickly manhandled off his horse by the New South Wales Police Commissioner, William Big Bill Mackay, which you might know because
I do know.
Razor Gang.
I do.
Absolutely. So he tussles with the likes of Tilly Devine and Kate
Lee.
Lee. the queens of the underbelly, but now tussling with a disgruntled Irishman.
Who was still quite prominent around this period as well.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's even stories that certain missing people are still below the Sydney Harbour Bridges Foundation.
So I've got a few stories about those.
So anyway, on this day, Big Bill Mackay carried away Captain Francis de Groot while his sword was being confiscated as well. Most of the crowd was very disgruntled with this whole commotion, that it was even reported that some jeered from the crowd to say, "Throw him off the bridge. Run him through with his sword." Very larrikin, I like it. Now, of course, the most disgruntled on that day was the Premier himself, having his thunder being stolen. He'd rather let the whole thing, rather than letting the whole thing subside, he actually ordered the ribbon to be retied in a nice little bow. So we could all pretend like nothing had happened, and he could come out again and successfully open the bridge for the second time with those golden scissors. Now, there was actually an opening or cutting on either side of the bridge, so north and south. But as I mentioned before, a certain North Sydney mayor was a member of the New Guard. So maybe he also was in amongst the sort of knowledge of what was about to happen on the south side, because he actually didn't step out and do anything until the second cutting of the ribbon.
Right.
So they actually were all tied up with electrical cord that would send a signal, their signal box, that would then let the actual artillery on the shores, the foreshore there in the harbour, to then sound a 21-gun salute, which then would signal a plane that's been flying over and circling to then swoop across the bridge, which then would let all the flotilla blast their horns. So Captain Francis de Groot was basically planning to disrupt all that by simply cutting it first.
Yeah.
But interestingly, off to the side where the signal box was, it was a manual switch to either make it live or deactivate.
Right.
The controller had a weird inclining to only wait until he saw Premier Lang get his scissors on the ribbon before he actually activated and made it live. And thank God he did, because then when Francis de Groot did it, nothing happened.
I bet someone's actually doing their jobs.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. 1932. But yeah, now, interestingly, out of this whole event and with Captain de Groot and all that sort of stuff, for Sir Philip Game and his family, the most amusing thing they found out was the controversy thrown up about the 21-gun salute. So usually, as a head of state or royal, whatever, they get a 21-gun salute. But whether or not they should get a 17-gun salute or a 21, because it's not the governor opening the bridge, it's the Premier. And so royal heads of state, as I said, get 21. Field marshals and state officials equivalents gets 19. But generals and equivalents, so air vice marshals, which is his rank, would only receive a 17. Now, I've already spoiled it, but on the day, they decided a 21-gun salute. After that whole fiasco on the bridge, and once again, Jack Lang getting showed up by that Irishman, Captain Francis de Groot, he didn't get any time to rest, because now his new fight wasn't the New Guard, it was back over to the Commonwealth government.
And this is where we're going to be leaving you guys with part 2 on a nice little cliffhanger. And now, I didn't think we'd need a part 3, but there's still so much more to cover before the conclusion. I hope you've all enjoyed this so far, as much as I have, and I can't wait to get into part 3, where we will finally end the tour so you can enjoy the rest of your day and go about your business. The special guest in the series is Matthew Lange, guide at Government House in Sydney. The music was composed by Scott Aird and the logo designed by Melinda Behrman. Please tell your mates, and if you are a tour guide or know of one, please reach out to me at my email mentioned below, and we'll see you at the final place for this epic conclusion. Hooroo.